During our 10th anniversary dinner at the fancy Italian restaurant downtown, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off with Nolan. His smile seemed forced, and he kept glancing at his phone whenever it buzzed in his pocket. A tiny crease formed between his eyebrows, like he was anxious about something. "Everything okay?" I asked, reaching across the table to squeeze his hand. The candlelight flickered in his brown eyes as he looked up. "Yeah, of course. Just work stuff. You know how it is." Nolan flashed me a reassuring grin, but I could tell he was holding something back. As we dug into our plates of linguine alla vongole, I tried to push the nagging feeling aside and enjoy the evening. Nolan and I had been together for over a decade, since we met in college. Back then, we were just two kids dreaming of building a life together in Seattle. Now, at 35, I was living that dream. A cozy house in the suburbs, a fulfilling job as an elementary school teacher, and a kind, loving husband who worked at a tech firm downtown. We didn't have kids yet, but we were comfortable and happy, or so I thought. Nolan reached for the bottle of Chianti to refill his glass, his third of the night. "To us," he said, raising his glass with a tight smile. 10 years down, forever to go." I clinked my glass against his, trying to ignore the way his eyes kept darting to his phone. Maybe I was just being paranoid. Nolan loved me, didn't he? But as the nights turned into weeks of his increasingly distant behavior, those niggling doubts only grew stronger. I couldn't ignore the truth any longer. Something was very wrong in my perfect little world. "Maybe he's just going through a phase," Cora said over coffee one morning, her brow furrowed with concern. "Men can be like that sometimes, get distant when they're stressed about work or whatever." I shook my head, staring into the depths of my latte. "It's more than that, Cora. You should see how he is at home these days." Nolan had been coming home later and later from the office, his smiles growing forced by the day. We barely spoke anymore, and when we did, it felt like pulling teeth to get more than one-word answers out of him. "He's constantly on his phone, typing away furiously whenever I leave the room," I confided. "And the other night, when I suggested we go out for our usual date night, he just mumbled some excuse about having to work late." Cora reached across the table, squeezing my hand. "Oh, honey, I'm so sorry you're going through this. Have you tried talking to him about it?" A bitter laugh escaped my lips. "You think I haven't? Every time I bring it up, he just brushes me off, says he's been swamped at work and that it's nothing to worry about." But I knew better. Call it a wife's intuition, but deep down, I could sense that something was seriously wrong in our marriage. The Nolan I fell in love with, the caring, attentive man who used to dote on me, was slowly slipping away, replaced by this cold, distant stranger. That evening, I decided to try one more time. As Nolan sat on the couch, scrolling mindlessly on his phone, I approached him. "Nolan, we need to talk." My voice was steady, but my heart pounded in my chest. He glanced up, his expression unreadable. "About what?" "About us. Our marriage." I took a deep breath. "I can't help but feel like you've been pulling away lately, and I want to know why." For a moment, he just stared at me, his jaw clenched. Then, with a heavy sigh, he set his phone down. "It's just been really stressful at work, Lila. You know how demanding my job can be." I crossed my arms unconvinced. "That's not a good enough excuse, and you know it. We're supposed to be partners, remember? For better or worse. But lately, it feels like you've checked out of our marriage completely." Nolan ran a hand through his hair, frustration etched onto his face. "Look, I'm trying my best here, okay? Cut me some slack." "Some slack?" I repeated, my voice rising. "Nolan, I deserve better than this. We deserve better than what you've been giving our marriage." His lips pressed into a thin line, and for a split second I saw something flicker in his eyes. Guilt, perhaps. But as quickly as it came, it was gone, replaced by a cold, detached expression. "Maybe you're right," he muttered, standing up abruptly. "Maybe this isn't working anymore." And with that, he grabbed his keys and walked out the door, leaving me standing there in stunned silence, feeling like the ground had been ripped out from under me. A few weeks later, Nolan's company was hosting a big gala event to celebrate some major client wins. As his wife, I was expected to attend and play the part of the doting partner. Despite the growing rift between us, I agreed, hoping it might be a chance for us to reconnect. The venue was a swanky downtown hotel, and I had picked out a sleek black dress that hugged my curves just right. If Nolan wasn't going to make an effort, at least I could look good for myself. As we mingled with Nolan's colleagues and their partners, I plastered on a fake smile, making small talk about work and the weather. Nolan stuck close by my side, but his eyes kept drifting across the room, like he was searching for someone. That's when I spotted her. A tall, slender woman with long chestnut hair cascading over her bare shoulders. Her red dress clung to her body like a second skin, leaving little to the imagination. She was laughing at something a man had said, throwing her head back in an exaggerated gesture. Nolan's gaze locked onto her, and I felt a pang of recognition. This woman looked vaguely familiar, but I couldn't quite place her. Before I could ponder it further, the woman's eyes met Nolan's, and she excused herself from her conversation partner. My heart sank as she began sauntering over to us, a predatory gleam in her eyes. "Nolan," she purred, resting a perfectly manicured hand on his arm. "I've been looking for you all night." He cleared his throat, shifting uncomfortably. "Ivy, this is my wife, Lila. Lila, this is Ivy Richardson. She's a new project manager at the company." My smile froze on my face as realization hit me like a punch to the gut. So this was the woman Nolan had been messaging constantly. I was sure of it. Ivy's eyes raked over me with thinly veiled disdain. "Charmed, I'm sure," she drawled, making no effort to hide her contempt. "Likewise," I managed to choke out, my grip tightening around my champagne flute. Nolan laughed nervously, oblivious to the charged tension between us. "Well, you two should get to know each other better. Ivy's been doing great work on the Henderson account." "Is that so?" I asked through gritted teeth, shooting daggers at Ivy with my eyes. She smirked, running her hand slowly down Nolan's arm. "We've certainly been working closely together on a lot of things." The insinuation in her tone was undeniable, and a sickening realization washed over me. My husband, my Nolan, was having an affair with this vile, shameless woman right under my nose. I opened my mouth to unleash the torrent of fury building inside me, but Nolan cut me off. "Actually, I was just about to grab us some drinks from the bar. Can I get you anything, Ivy?" His voice was laced with a strange eagerness that made my skin crawl. "A dirty martini would be lovely," Ivy purred, her hand lingering on Nolan's arm for a beat too long. As he hurried off towards the bar, I rounded on Ivy, my face flushed with rage. "I don't know what kind of sick game you're playing here, but let me make one thing crystal clear. Nolan is my husband, and if you think you can just swoop in and steal him away, you've got another thing coming." Ivy tossed her hair over her shoulder, utterly unfazed by my outburst. "Oh, sweetie, the only one playing games here is your dear husband. But by all means, keep deluding yourself into thinking you actually mean something to him." Her words cut deeper than any knife, and I had to fight back the urge to slap that smug grin right off her face. Instead, I clenched my fists, trying to rein in my emotions. "You're going to regret this," I hissed through clenched teeth. "I'll make sure of it." Ivy let out a mocking laugh. Empty threats from a sad, pathetic woman. How deliciously tragic. She turned on her heel and sauntered away, leaving me seething and humiliated in the middle of the crowded ballroom. As Nolan rejoined me, oblivious to what had just transpired, I felt a cold, hard knot of determination form in the pit of my stomach. If it was war she wanted, then war was what she'd get. I would make Ivy regret the day she ever laid eyes on my husband. In the days following the gala, I barely slept or ate. My mind was consumed by the image of Ivy's hand trailing down Nolan's arm, her voice dripping with smugness as she all but admitted to their affair. The betrayal burned like acid in my veins. I needed proof. Solid, undeniable evidence that I could shove in Nolan's face and make him see the truth. Maybe then some small part of the man I loved would resurface and put an end to this madness. So one night, as Nolan snored lightly beside me, I reached over and snatched his phone off the nightstand. My hands trembled as I tapped in his passcode, our anniversary date, a bitter irony. The phone unlocked, revealing a flurry of messages from a contact simply labeled IR. My heart pounded as I opened the thread. There it was, in black and white. Hundreds of messages between Nolan and Ivy, some innocuous but many far too intimate for mere colleagues. "Can't wait to see you tonight, handsome. You looked incredible at the party. That dress left little to the imagination. I miss the feeling of your lips on mine." White-hot rage seared through me as I read their shameless exchanges. This was so much worse than I'd imagined, a full-blown emotional affair at the very least. Bile rose in my throat, but I forced myself to keep reading, taking screenshots to document the evidence. I needed ammunition for the war that was about to come. As I scrolled further back in time, my blood ran cold at one particular message from Nolan. "You're right, I do need to end things with Lila. This has gone too far, and she deserves better than living a lie." My hands went numb, nearly dropping the phone. He'd been planning to leave me, to discard me like a piece of trash for that vile succubus Ivy. A choked sob escaped my lips before I could stop it. Nolan stirred beside me. "Lila?" he mumbled groggily. "What's wrong?" I turned to face him, tears streaming down my cheeks, clutching his phone like a lifeline. "How could you?" I whispered hoarsely. "How could you do this to me, to us?" His eyes went wide as he took in the phone, panic flashing across his features. "Lila, I can explain." "Explain what?" I spat, anger eclipsing my hurt. "That you've been carrying on an affair with that woman behind my back? That you were going to leave me for her?" Nolan opened and closed his mouth, at a loss for words. Pathetic. "I loved you," I choked out, my voice thick with emotion. "I gave you everything. And this is how you repay me?" He surged forward, reaching out as if to embrace me. "Baby, please. It's not what it looks like." But I recoiled from his touch, holding up the phone defiantly. "Don't you dare try to deny it, Nolan. I have all the proof I need right here." His face crumpled in resignation as he slowly sank back onto the bed. "I'm so sorry," he whispered brokenly. "I never meant to hurt you." I let out a bitter laugh, swiping at the tears on my cheeks. "Well, you did. You hurt me more than you'll ever know." As I turned and stormed out of the bedroom, clutching the phone with the damning evidence, a newfound sense of purpose burned within me. If Nolan thought he could just toss me aside and ride off into the sunset with his mistress, he had another thing coming. I was done being the victim. It was time to plan my revenge. Armed with the incriminating evidence from Nolan's phone, I knew I had to confront him and Ivy directly. No more dancing around the issue. It was time to blow this sordid affair wide open. A few days later, I marched into Nolan's office building downtown, my heels clicking determinedly against the marble floors. The security guard eyed me warily as I blazed past the reception desk. "Ma'am, you can't just go up there," he called out, but I ignored him, stabbing the button for the elevators. When I stepped out onto Nolan's floor, I spotted him immediately through the glass walls of his office. He was bent over his desk, completely engrossed in whatever was on his computer screen. Ivy was there too, perched on the edge of his desk in a tight skirt that rode dangerously high up her thighs. She leaned in close as they pored over the documents together, her chest practically spilling out of her blouse. White-hot fury licked at my insides as I watched their intimate display. Gripping the manila envelope containing the printed text messages, I stormed over and flung the door open with a bang. Nolan's head snapped up, his eyes widening in shock and fear. "Lila, what are you doing here?" Ivy simply raised an immaculately groomed eyebrow, her lips curling into a disdainful smirk. Well, if it isn't the little wife." I leveled my gaze at her, jaw clenched. "Save it, you home-wrecking snake. I know all about your sordid little affair with my husband." Reaching into the envelope, I pulled out the printouts and flung them onto Nolan's desk, the papers fluttering across the surface. Nolan went deathly pale as he scanned the indisputable evidence. "How did you—" "Does it matter?" I seethed, rounding on him. "What matters is that you've been lying and cheating on me this entire time." I turned back to Ivy, who was examining her manicured nails with a bored expression. "And you make me sick, preying on my husband like some cheap, shameless hussy." A mocking laugh bubbled from her lips. "Oh, feisty. I can see why Nolan's so smitten." She traced a finger along Nolan's arm, her touch lingering just a beat too long. "Isn't that right, handsome?" My blood boiled at her taunting words. In that moment, something inside me snapped. Before I could stop myself, I lunged forward and slapped Ivy clear across the face, the sound reverberating through the office like a gunshot. "You bitch!" she shrieked, clutching her stinging cheek. Her perfectly coiffed hair was mussed, mascara smudged under her eyes. "You're gonna regret that." Nolan leapt to his feet, grabbing my arms to restrain me. "Lila, stop! You're causing a scene." But I wasn't finished. Adrenaline coursed through my veins as I wheeled on him next. "No, you stop," I shouted, shoving him away from me. "This is the only way either of you snakes will listen. I want a divorce, Nolan. This marriage is over." He froze, his expression crumpling. For a fleeting second, I thought I saw remorse flicker in his eyes. "Lila, please," he started, reaching out imploringly, but I cut him off with a cold, steely glare. "You made your bed, Nolan. Now you can lie in it, with her." I jabbed an accusing finger at Ivy, whose cheeks were still flushed with outrage. As I turned on my heel and stormed out, I could hear the shocked murmurs of Nolan's coworkers who had witnessed the whole sordid scene. But I didn't care. The cheating liars had been exposed, and soon they'd face the consequences of their despicable actions. My quest for revenge was only just beginning. In the days following my explosive confrontation with Nolan and Ivy, I found myself surprisingly calm. The initial storm of anger and betrayal had passed, replaced by a steely determination to make them pay for what they'd done. I may have lost my husband, but I hadn't lost my self-respect. And I'd be damned if I let those two schemers just ride off into the sunset without facing any consequences. So I devised a plan, a deliciously devious scheme that would hit them where it hurt most, their reputations and their pocketbooks. First, I gathered even more evidence, documenting every instance of Nolan's misconduct that violated his company's ethics policies. The misuse of corporate resources for his dalliances with Ivy, the inappropriate relationships, the blatant lies on his expense reports to cover up their escapades. I compiled it all into a tidy file, complete with copies of those damning text messages, ready to present to his boss and the HR department. Next, I dug deeper into Ivy's background, searching for any skeletons in her closet that could be used as leverage. As it turned out, the sleazy homewrecker had quite a few secrets of her own. Like the fact that she was carrying on not just with my husband, but with another married executive at the company too. Or how about those shady business dealings with a former client that had led to a nasty lawsuit? I gathered all the sordid details and incriminating documents, preparing to leak them to the press and Ivy's unsuspecting partner at just the right moment. With everything in place, I decided to lull my prey into a false sense of security first. I started being overly friendly with Nolan again, pretending I was finally ready to forgive and move on. "Lila, I'm so sorry," he blubbered during one of our clandestine meetups at a cafe near his office. "What I did was inexcusable, but I want to make things right. I still love you." I gave him my most radiant smile, pulling his hands into mine. "I know, baby, and I love you too. That's why I'm willing to give our marriage another chance." He seemed stunned by my apparent change of heart, but too desperate and pathetic to question it. Over the next few weeks, I let him think we were working through the hurt and rebuilding our trust, all the while compiling more proof of his indiscretions behind the scenes. Ivy, for her part, seemed utterly convinced that she'd won. The smug look she shot me whenever our paths crossed said it all. Little did either of them know, I was simply luring them into my carefully laid trap. Everything was going according to plan. Finally, when I had enough ammunition to bury them both, I started planting little seeds here and there. An anonymous email to Ivy's partner with details of her affairs, a copied file mysteriously left on her boss's desk at work. At first, they brushed it off as someone's attempt at a sick joke. But slowly, the dominoes began to fall into place around them. Ivy started facing whispers and stares everywhere she went, as the news of her transgressions spread like wildfire. Clients began dropping her company left and right, the two disgusted by her unethical behavior. Nolan, meanwhile, found himself being summoned into endless meetings with HR and the executives, as each new piece of evidence against him came to light. His desperate pleas of innocence fell on increasingly deaf ears. They say the best revenge is living well. But there's also a particular satisfaction in being the architect of your enemy's downfall, watching every last piece of their lives crumble around them because of their own vile misdeeds. As Ivy and Nolan began to drown in the tsunami of consequences they'd brought upon themselves, I stood back and observed with a dark, triumphant smile. The cheating liars were getting exactly what they deserved, and it was all thanks to the deliciously devious scheme I'd executed to perfection. As the fallout from my meticulously planned revenge scheme intensified, It was almost comical to witness Ivy and Nolan's lives unraveling before their eyes. Ivy's entire world came crashing down in spectacular fashion. Word of her affairs with multiple married executives spread like wildfire, earning her a reputation as a home-wrecking pariah. Clients dropped her firm left and right, disgusted by her unethical behavior. Even her own partner wasn't spared from the shockwaves. After receiving those anonymous emails detailing Ivy's indiscretions, he promptly kicked her out and filed for divorce, leaving her with nothing. I'll never forget the look on her face when she showed up at my doorstep one evening, tears of makeup streaking her cheeks. "You did this," she choked out, hatred burning in her eyes. "You ruined everything." I simply gave her a cold, triumphant smile. "I warned you not to mess with me, Ivy. You reap what you sow." With a guttural scream of rage, she lunged at me, hands outstretched like claws, but I was ready, sidestepping her attack with ease. "Save it," I spat as she crashed against the doorframe. "You've already lost. Now get out of my sight before I call the cops." Ivy slunk away in humiliated defeat, her life in utter ruins because of her own despicable actions. Karma, as they say, is a bitch. As for Nolan, well, let's just say he didn't fare much better. Turns out his cozy tech company had a very strict no-fraternization policy that he'd blatantly violated. Strike one. Then there were all those expense reports he'd falsified to cover up his and Ivy's little rendezvous, using corporate funds for personal dalliances. Strike two. When the higher-ups received that anonymous file detailing every last instance of misconduct, ethics breach, and company policy violation, they didn't take it lightly. Strike three, you're out. Nolan was promptly fired and faced with a mountain of damning evidence that could potentially lead to legal troubles, all because he couldn't keep it in his pants. He came crawling to me one evening, a sniveling, pathetic mess desperate for my forgiveness and support. As if. "Lila, please," he blubbered, clutching the manila envelope of termination papers. "I've lost everything because of my stupid mistakes. My job, my reputation, it's all gone. You have to help me." I fixed him with a cold, steely glare, fighting back the urge to spit in his face. "The only one who has to do anything here is you," I stated flatly. "You need to sign those divorce papers and get the hell out of my life for good." Nolan's jaw dropped in stunned disbelief. But I thought we were working things out? You said you forgave me." A harsh laugh tore from my throat. "You're even dumber than you look if you actually believed that load of crap." Reaching into my purse, I pulled out a crisp folder and tossed it at his feet, the contents spilling across the floor, copies of every last text between him and Ivy, evidence of his corporate violations, you name it. "That's just a taste of all the proof I gathered while I was pretending to take you back," I said, watching realization slowly dawn over his stupid, cheating face. "Everything you've lost, your job, your money, your precious Ivy, it's all because of your own sickening behavior. I just gave you the consequences you deserved." Nolan's mouth opened and closed like a gasping fish as he processed the magnitude of what I'd done. You planned this whole thing? All of it?" I leveled him with a look of pure disdain. "You're damn right I did. I told that snake Ivy she was going to regret the day she messed with me, and I meant it. Now here we are, and you're both getting exactly what you deserve. To lose everything, just like I did when you betrayed me." With a look of utter devastation, Nolan slumped to his knees, cradling his head in his hands as racking sobs shook his body. But I felt no pity whatsoever, only a deep sense of satisfaction that karmic justice had been served. Months later, as the crisp autumn air turned to the bitter chill of winter, I could finally begin to breathe again. The deep wounds left by Nolan's betrayal were starting to heal over, leaving me stronger and more resilient than ever before. I'd moved out of our suburban home that once felt like a gilded cage into a cozy downtown apartment that was all my own. With the hefty divorce settlement and my renewed focus on work, I was building a new life for myself from the ashes of my shattered marriage. It felt incredible to stand on my own 2 feet again, no longer weighed down by the constant anxiety and heartbreak of Nolan's infidelity. I was finally free. Of course, there were still tough days when the anger and hurt would bubble back up unexpectedly. Like the morning I ran into Nolan at a cafe near my new place, I just ordered my usual soy latte when that all-too-familiar voice made me freeze. "Lila?" Is that you?" I turned slowly to see him sitting at a corner table, looking unbearably pathetic in a rumpled suit and day-old stubble. The light had gone out of his eyes, leaving them dull and haunted. Part of me wanted to keep walking, to pretend I hadn't seen the sad shell of a man he'd become, but another part felt compelled to face him, to confirm just how far he'd fallen from grace. "Nolan," I said flatly, clutching my coffee cup. "Fancy meeting you here." He opened his mouth as if to say something, then seemed to think better of it. An awkward silence stretched between us, thick with unspoken history. How are you doing?" he finally managed, rubbing the back of his neck anxiously. I gave a nonchalant shrug. "I'm good, actually. Really good. Teaching keeps me busy, and I've been exploring some fun hobbies in my free time." That's great, Lila. I'm happy for you." His voice was subdued, defeated. We both knew I was lying through my teeth. I was more than just good. I was thriving, flourishing in the aftermath of shedding him from my life. Nolan, on the other hand? Well, one look at his haggard face and slumped shoulders told the whole story. Losing his fancy job, his status, his money, and his mistress in one fell swoop had clearly broken something inside him. Part of me felt a pang of pity, but the rest of me remained coldly indifferent, even satisfied to see the pathetic, sniveling man he'd become. This was the price he paid for his sickening betrayal. Let it be a hard lesson etched into his bones. As I turned to leave, coffee in hand, Nolan reached out as if to stop me. "Lila, wait." His voice cracked with desperation. "I'm so sorry. For everything. You didn't deserve any of that pain I caused you. I was a stupid, selfish bastard, and I'll regret it until the day I die." I paused, letting his words hang heavy in the air between us. Once upon a time, I might have accepted that apology, might have even felt the sting of tears. But now, those useless words just rolled off me like water off a duck's back. We were far past the point of making amends. Fixing him with a cool, appraising stare, I simply said, "I know you are, and I truly don't care anymore, Nolan. That's the beautiful part." I left him gaping after me, mouth opening and closing like a landed fish, as I strode out of the cafe with my head held high. No more tears, no more anger, just the delicious sense of closure after claiming my long-overdue justice. That poisoned chapter of my life was finally, blessedly, over. And as I stepped out into the brisk morning air, breathing in the crispness of my newfound freedom, I felt an overwhelming sense of lightness washing over me. The cheating liar who'd once crushed my heart under his heel was now powerless. I'd conquered the demons of betrayal through the sweetest revenge imaginable, breaking the cycle and choosing to live well instead of being consumed by hatred. With a faint smile playing on my lips, I pressed on down the sidewalk, eagerly ready to embrace this new and infinitely brighter path laid out before me.